Hi, welcome to this week's blog. You know, Paul's ministry, towards the end of his ministry, towards the end of his life, he was passing the baton of leadership on to Timothy. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, we're told that in the last days, people will become lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, prideful, abusive, slanderous. They would be unholy and ungrateful. In verse 5 of 2 Timothy 3, it says that they would be lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. It says they will have a form of godliness but deny its power. And it says to have nothing to do with people like this. Well, who was Paul writing to? Who's the audience of 2 Timothy 3? When you look at it, it's not mankind in general. It's not those who are unsaved. It's the church. And imagine the church, the people in the church acting that way and behaving that way, becoming lovers of themselves more than lovers of God, becoming lovers of money, being slanderous and boastful and prideful and ungrateful and unholy. That's what we're heading towards. There was an article in the New York Times recently on a man called David Stockman. David Stockman was a member of Congress. He was in the House. He was from Michigan. He was also in President Reagan's administration. He was his budget director. So Stockman, when he got out of Washington, he got into Wall Street. So he may not be the best role model, because once he got into Wall Street, he was brought up on charges, both criminal and civil. However, he was an insider, and he understands what's going on. And when he spoke out, again, when the New York Times carried this, many people followed through and carried what he said, because he was very bold in what he was saying. He was saying, you know what, look, just the facts are that middle class families, their income have dropped 8%. He says that their jobs, the middle class jobs, have dropped 6%. People on food stamps, they've more than doubled in the last few years. And he says the government's printing money like crazy. The number he was using was they're printing $600 million per hour. He says you can't sustain that. He says all this bubble, this will collapse again, and when it does, there will be no bailouts, there will be no safety net. So when you look at Stockman, who was an insider and understands what's going on, when he comes out and says this, what he said is that America is broke. Well, we understand that. He says we're broke financially, but he also said we're broke morally and we're broke intellectually. He says things are going on right in front of us that we don't understand, that we don't get. So morally we are broke, and intellectually we don't understand what's happening. To me, that was very interesting. When the secular world can look at the church and in a culture and where we live and say we're morally and intellectually broke, that's a huge statement. 2 Timothy says that when we become lovers of self, when we raise ourselves up, that we can't love God the way that we want to love God. We can't love ourselves at the same level and love God at the same level. Something has to be pushed down. So when we bring ourselves up, we push God and the things of God down. Love of money represents materialism. It's not your basic needs that we all need, but it's materialism. Stockman comes out, again, he's a money guy, and he says typically that the public sector and the private sector, we should borrow about $1.50 to $1.60 for every dollar of our GDP. Our GDP is our gross domestic products. What this is the price, the value of what we do for services and for products. So if you go to a restaurant, the money you pay for the food and the tip you give the waiter, when you put all that together, our GDP, what is that? For every dollar that we have in that, we should borrow about $1.50 to $1.60. He says that's healthy. Businesses have lines of credit, people have mortgages, so that's a healthy economy. We're doing it now. He went to 2006 and 2007. He said we created $6 worth of debt for every $1 in GDP. He says that Americans are basically spending and borrowing everything they can. Everything they could borrow, they consumed. They were going out and refinancing their homes for $25,000, $50,000 and just doing silly things with it. It's not wise to live that way. It becomes towards what Timothy says, we become lovers of self and lovers of money. In Romans, Paul says, he warns us in Romans 1, he says, although they knew God, they neither glorified him or gave thanks to him. And he says, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. I don't know if you ever heard about the Import-Export Bank of the United States, but recently they held their conference in D.C. back in April, and Vice President Biden spoke at it. And if you listen to what Biden says, remember, Stockman says we have been intellectually broke. We don't understand what's being said in front of us. Biden came out in front of everybody, and you can YouTube it and look at it. He said basically the global order has changed. But what does that mean? He says that we have to update the global rule. Well, what does that mean? What does that say about our Constitution? And he says we need to level the playing field. They are telling us in front of us what they want to do. This is the evilness of Psalm 64. Psalm 64 says they plot injustice and say we have devised a perfect plan. Folks, if Stockman's right, if we are broke financially, morally, and intellectually, we need to wake up and make some changes. I beg you, search God's Word and think about these things. God bless you.